start sharing my screen and talking about the two apps that we're going to build today. I'm going to reverse the order. I know in the agenda it said we're going to do a B2B invoice generator first and then a checkout validation app. We got a lot of requests to see the checkout extension application. So I'm going to start with that to make sure everyone can see that. And then as time allows, we'll go to the second application I wanted to build, which is a invoice generator. And if we don't have time for the invoice generator, usually there's something I can do to kind of speed up the demos a little bit. Give me one moment, folks, as I kind of mute everything up and share my screen. I'm going to share my entire desktop. That should work. Great. So we are, how do I hide this annoying widget? Sorry, I don't use Zoom regularly, so you'll all have to bear with me for a moment as I figure my way out. There we go. So we're going to build two apps today. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and if not, please do shout out in the chat. The first one's going to be a VAT validation app. So VATs are European tax IDs. They're tax information that you can collect and verify using a API that the European Union makes available. And there's a requirement on certain businesses that are selling certain types of products to certain types of buyers to collect and verify this tax information. So it's a popular app. You'll find it on the App Store. People pay quite a lot of money for it. And typically what it does is you add a extension to the Shopify checkout, a little field. So this is the store we're going to work with. It's a test store that I have set up with checkout extension previews. And this is what my checkout looks like right now. What I want to do is I want to add a field, just one more of these fields, maybe right above the country. And I want to collect the VAT number, the tax ID number of the buyer every time they check out. And then what I want to do with that, so that's kind of the front end of my app. That's a shopper-facing checkout extension that adds a VAT field to the checkout, and it collects the information and stores it in a Shopify meta field. Then the second part is I'll probably fetch that data through Gadget on the server side. So there's a backend where I'm going to take the information that comes in from that field, and I'm going to go verify it against the VS VAT NPM package. So there's a nice little JavaScript library with a node package available that you can use to do VAT verification. This second portion, the server side, is going to be done entirely in Gadget. The client side checkout extensions must be submitted through Shopify CLI. So I'm going to use Shopify CLI to submit my front end. And then once I've done that, I'll go set up my app through Gadget, set up all the server side OAuth, the webhook topic registrations, webhook handling, and the server side logic to actually take the webhook payload that contains the VAT ID and verify it against a third-party service. So that's the first application we're going to build. And hopefully that was clear to everyone. We're just going to get started. Let me open up my terminal. So the first thing you want to do is run npm init. I believe it's Shopify app latest, and this should trigger Shopify to ask us a bunch of questions like a project name. So we'll call this a VAT validation app. And we're going to use the node library because everything Gadget does is in JS. Not that it matters in this particular project because the front end submission and the back end in Gadget are so decoupled that it wouldn't really matter, but I'm going to go with node anyways. And Shopify is going to set up a bunch of dependencies to kind of boot up Shopify CLI. So let's give it a moment. I see someone's already submitted a question. Will this be recorded? It should be recorded. Emma, is this recorded? She's not here, but I can.
Yes. No, sorry. It is being recorded.
Awesome. So yes, it is being recorded. This is still running. It's going to take maybe 30 seconds to install all the dependencies. We'll have to give it a bit of time. Once in a while it crashes, which is really annoying. We'll just have to be patient with Shopify, and sometimes awkwardly it just doesn't work, which we also have to be patient with. So we'll just sit here and wait a little bit. While we're waiting, I maybe can explain a little bit up front what I'm going to do next. So, okay, great. It's actually set up. I'm going to CD in to the folder directory that was just created for me. You can actually see the instructions right here. So CD that validation app. Now, Gadget will handle a lot of the web and server side of my application for me. So as a proficient Gadget user, I know that anytime I'm using Shopify CLI alongside Gadget, it's just a little bit easier to use if I nuke the web folder. So kind of without even really reading any of Gadget's tutorials, I just kind of know that what I want to do is actually remove the web folder from this directory because it conflicts with Gadget and I don't need it. Now we're gonna run dev. We're gonna do npm run dev to start up the Shopify CLI and create the app in the partners dashboard. So if you go to my partners dashboard right now, if we look at apps, there is none here yet called that validation app. It's because I haven't quite created it. What we'll do is we'll just run npm run dev. And again, we'll wait a little bit. I will create this under the Gadget organization. I have numerous Shopify partner accounts, so I'm just going to do this under the official Gadget account. I'm going to create a new app. So I'm just answering the questions that the CLI is surfacing to me. And again, I don't know why they asked for the name numerous times, but we'll give it to Shopify again. It's called that validation app. I'm going to have to pick a store that I'm going to use from my development store list to build out this checkout extension. When you're building checkout extensions with Shopify, the store you have to select must have the developer preview for checkout extensions enabled. So if you go to your partner dashboard in Shopify and you click on stores, there's all these little notes. You can see the store I'm going to use is called Ralph Tutorial Test. It has checkout extensibility preview enabled. But if you have a giant list of stores, you can actually see not all of them have it enabled. You must use a store that has checkout extensibility preview enabled in order for you to be able to create a checkout extension. So I'm going to use Ralph's Tutorial Test store because I know that works. Now, while this is, okay, so I think everything's set up. If we go to my partners dashboard now under apps, there we go. There's the VAT validation app. So I have some credentials. And now what I'm going to do is, let me just kill the terminal real quick so it stops running. We don't need npm run dev to be running while we finish our setup. What I'm going to do is do the Gadget side of the setup. So I create a new project in Gadget. This is my Gadget account. And I'll hit new app. And I'll call it that validation app. Right out of the gate, I'm going to go connect to the Shopify credentials. So I got my client ID and secret key through both the CLI, but it's also available to you in this interface in your partner dashboard once the app is created. I'm going to copy paste these into Gadget. Now, what I need from Gadget on the server side is order data. Because what's going to happen is my checkout's going to collect this VAT information, and it's going to store it in a meta field. And that meta field, I'm going to fetch alongside the order record that it belongs to. So I'll know who placed the order, what's their address, what country are they in, and what VAT number did they include in the checkout, because I need both the VAT number and the country code to submit to the API I was talking about that's going to do the verification for us. So In Gadget's abstraction, the way you set up your server-side application to retrieve the data that you're looking for from Shopify is you think in models and scopes. So I need order events to power my app. I'm just going to look for the order scopes, and I can see orders here, read and write. I'm going to grab both of them. I'm going to read the order data to fetch the information from the checkout and send it to a third party to validate. But I'm going to take the right order scope as well, because I'm going to write the results, whether the VAT number is valid or invalid, back to the order in the form of a tag so that you can actually see it inside the Shopify admin. I'll show you folks what this looks like in a second. What I'm trying to do here is avoid building any UI. I'm going to use Shopify's UI essentially to kind of manage everything. So I need read and write orders. Below that is the Gadget abstraction question. The way Gadget works is we will create a clone of whatever table of data that is powered by this scope that you really care about, and we'll place it in your backend for you. And we'll create an event pipeline automatically that will synchronize events from Shopify with this table. The data I need specifically is in the order table. So I'm just going to go fetch from order table. And I don't need anything else. So I'm just going to hit confirm. Now, what'll happen here in my left nav is a bunch of tables and a bunch of API endpoints that are documented in my API get dropped into my application environment. So I now have a table called Shopify order in my database. And the shape of the table defined by these fields down here. Sorry, I'm going to make my screen a little bit smaller. I'm working on a small screen laptop today, so apologies if things look a little cluttered. But these are the fields that make up Shopify's order table. Gadget has set up an order table in your Postgres database that we give you with each project, matching these fields, types, and validations. And on top of that, Gadget set up 3 actions, we call them, which effectively take whatever data comes from Shopify in the form of a webhook, or if we wanted to sync historical data, and run it by copying over the information to my Gadget table. My Gadget table is empty right now. Even though it matches the Shopify table, there's nothing in there. But once I finish setting it up, presumably anytime an order webhook fires, I will get it. Anytime I synchronize historical orders, which I won't be doing today, I will get that as well. So that's essentially what Gadget's setting up for me here. Now, before we go further on the server side setup, I want to go back and finish my checkout extension. Actually, let me finish setting up my Shopify connection because we're 2/3 of the way there and it'll confuse everyone if I keep switching back and forth. So I haven't finished setting up my Shopify connection. I just gave Gadget my API keys, but I have some URLs that represent the development environment that I'm currently working in, because development is in the cloud, that I can take back to Shopify. So I'm going to grab my app URL. I'm going to move it to the app setup. I'm going to drop it in here, and Gadget also gives me a redirect callback URL, which I will drop in here as well. Once that is done, I hit save. And just as a precautionary second step, Shopify now requires that anyone accessing PII data, which I will be accessing because it's included in the order webhook, fills out this protected customer data access form. So you just hit request access. You only really need to fill out the entire form when you're submitting your app to the App Store. If you're just building in development, which is what I'm doing, you can cheat. You can only answer the first part. You just say select protected customer data. I usually just say app functionality, save, and you're good to go. In development, that's all you need to do. For production, you will have to fill out this form properly, answer the questions properly. If you don't do this, you will not get PII data in your payloads. You won't get names, emails, phone numbers, or addresses. So it's a pretty important step if you're manipulating order data. So that's good on the server side setup. I haven't installed the app on a store yet. Let me go ahead and install the app on the store that I'm going to be building the checkout extension for. So I'm just going to use the install link that's included in the partner dashboard because I'm doing this on a test store, on a development store. Gadget's producing the OAuth for me, which it always does. I don't actually have to figure out how to produce this or request scopes correctly. Gadget will do it all for me. I hit install app. And once this is done, I will have my server side backend in Gadget fully linked to this store. And I have this front end page as well that's powered by a filing gadget where I can start building the admin interface of my application. In my case, there's really not going to be much for the merchant to look at. This is for the merchant. So I'm probably not going to redesign this page. Maybe I'll change this message to say, thank you for downloading my app. Everything is working. But beyond that, there's really no other UI that I need to surface to the merchant. So I'm going to ignore this page for now. This is usually very useful when you're building admin apps where there's a user interface for the merchant. You just fork this page and start kind of building a React front end, which is what we give you by default. So what have I done so far? Let's just pause for a second. I started the process via my terminal of creating a CLI app. I got my credentials. I wired up my credentials to a Gadget project. And now I have a Gadget project where I have a backend that mimics the type of events I want to get from Shopify. And it's installed already on one store, and you can always go see the status of installations. You can also go see, how your webhook registrations are doing and whatnot. Sorry, my internet just died on me a split second and it's back. So I can see this store has installed my app. I'm registered for the webhooks I care about. Let's move forward. Let's go back to the client side and build a checkout extension. So we're just going to go back to my terminal real quick, and we're going to start building a checkout extension. Now, I am in the folder directory for the project I created. If you recall, I did CD name of folder moments ago. So what I can do now is just run npm run Shopify app generate extension. And Shopify is going to change the boilerplate CLI code it gave me, which I haven't opened up in VS Code yet, but I will in a second. And it's going to add some additional folders for managing the checkout extension. So I'm going to run this command. And I'm asked what type of extension I'm trying to run. In my case, it's a checkout UI extension. So it's number 2. I pick number 2. Once more, I have to give it a name. Again, I'm not really sure why, but we'll name it that validation app for the 3rd time. I'm going to go with JavaScript React because that's what my local machine is set up for. And this might take a little bit of time as well. Shopify is going to go install a bunch of dependencies and change the shape of my boilerplate. So so a new extension was added to a folder in this directory. What we can do next is open up VS Code and look at this project. So I just opened up the directory that I had created using Shopify CLI, and this is what we're looking at. This is all the boilerplate that Shopify CLI gives me, including the additional extensions folder, which I created through CLI by running the npm run Shopify app generate command, generate extension command. And the one big difference between this and a normal CLI project is, if you recall earlier, I nuked the web folder. There's typically a web folder in here. It's gone. I killed it because the web folder in Gadget sometimes don't play nice. And if you're using Gadget, you can just nuke that web folder. So what do we need to do to actually add a field to a Shopify checkout. So there's two steps. If you go to the extensions folder, there's a file, there's a TOML file called shopify.ui.extension.toml. For those of you not familiar with TOML files, they're just spec files. They're like YAML files. They're like an open source YAML spec. And what you do here is you actually tell Shopify where your checkout extension is going to go. And so a really important step here is where you see extension points, checkout dynamic render. I'm actually going to just replace this with delivery address and render before. So what I'm teaching Shopify here is my checkout extension field is going to show up before the delivery address section of their checkout. So in the store, this is the delivery address section. I'm trying to teach Shopify that my field is going to be up here above the country. Where was I? I was in VS Code, right? Yeah. So we set this up, hit save. I always forget to save. And the next thing we need to do, and I'm probably going to copy paste a little bit of code to go a little faster here, is we go to the source file and we teach in source index, we're going to teach Shopify about our actual checkout extension. So to save a little bit of time, I have the code for it saved here. And I'm just going to take Shopify's source page and replace it with my own, and we're going to read through it. So I'm using the React library, that's fine. And then there's Shopify's UI extensions React library as well that comes with both React components and then some React hooks as well. And you can see which ones I'm using. I'm going to add a text field to the checkout, and I'm going to use some of Shopify's built-in React hooks to teach Shopify that the field is going to add and edit meta fields. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using some of the React hooks to update meta fields that, behind the scenes. I give my meta field a namespace and key. So meta fields are used in Shopify to store additional data that might not be modeled in their API. So there is no VAT number field on the order resource in Shopify. What I do instead is I teach Shopify that I need a meta field with the namespace gadget example and the key VAT number. And what my checkout extension is doing, this checkout extension that's being rendered before the delivery address, is it's updating that meta field using these React hooks. So that's really all I'm doing down here. Handle field change. I'm using that to update meta fields, and the field type, it's just a text field, VAT number, and on change, I'm running handle field change. So basically anytime anyone inputs anything to it, I submit it to the meta field that I defined with this namespace and key. So that's what my checkout extension is doing. It's a simple field called VAT number. It's going to take an input and it's going to store it in a meta field with this namespace and key. And then I'm going to fetch it server side through Gadget and validate it and return a result back to Shopify. So once you save this, you can actually submit your checkout extension to Shopify. We're pretty much done with the front end. We'll just go back to our terminal, and now we'll run npm run dev just to get the server going. And Shopify gives us this preview URL. So these preview URLs, if you drop them in your browser, they'll open up a Shopify kind of console. I don't know what to call this thing. I'm just calling it the console. And you can actually click this link, be taken to the checkout of the store that we're testing on, the Ralph test tutorial one that I set up my app for initially, my development store. And you can see I added a field called VAT number to the checkout. So I've completed half my project. I opened up Shopify CLI, I created an app, I created a checkout extension, I tweaked the two files I needed to tweak to get this field to show up. And when something is input in this field, it will go into a meta field with the namespace and key that I showed you folks earlier. So let's try this out. Let's just put some gibberish in. We'll put in some boilerplate info. This store right now, this development store is linked to Bogus Gateway, which is just kind of the test gateway Shopify gives you. When you're using Shopify's test gateway, you can just punch in cart number 1 and any name, any expiration date in the future, and any 3-digit code will work. And you just hit pay now and the order should be approved. Great. So order went through. Let's just look at the store itself and see what happened. So in the store, here's the order. You can see there's a VAT number field and AT6666. Okay, great. So I got the information on Shopify's side, but let's look at Gadget. So Gadget is connected to Shopify on the orders table right now. And if we go look at the orders table in Gadget, we'll notice that that same record should be here. Sorry, my internet is really slow at the moment, so things might get a little weird. This is the order that I just placed, and the webhook from Shopify with all of this information fired my create action, and my create action just took the parameters from the call from Shopify, the webhook from Shopify, and saved it to a table. I didn't do anything fancy. All I've done is I've just saved this data on my end, server side in Gadget. What you'll notice though is there is actually no VAT field yet on this record. And the reason for that is because Shopify, unfortunately, does not place the meta fields of a record on the record resource itself, meaning that the order and the order meta fields are not a single record. If you actually look at Shopify's API specs, the meta fields go in a separate table called meta fields, which is really unfortunate because then you have to fetch the order from orders, you have to fetch the meta field data from this meta field table, and then you have to like join them at read time, which is really slow, and you hit your rate limits twice as fast because of that exchange. With Gadget, you can do it kind of different. I'm going to delete this record from my development database, and before trying it again, I'm going to go to the model and I'm going to add a field to the product table, and the field's going to be called VAT number. And I'm going to teach Gadget that VAT number actually stores data from a Shopify meta field, and the name of the meta field was called Gadget example. And actually, I don't remember what so namespace was Gadget example, and the key was VAT number. Because I'm building this application for a single store, I can just click this button and tell Gadget, go register this namespace and key for this one store and make sure I get webhooks for it. If I was doing this for a public app where it was going to be installed by many stores at random times, and I can't come into Gadget and click a button every time, there is a way to do it in code as well. I'm not going to show that to you folks today. I want to move on with the example, but what I've done is I basically taught Shopify that any events related to this namespace and key should point to this one field in the order table in Gadget called VAT number. So let's go and try it again. Let's reboot that URL that Shopify gives us. Let's enter in some info. This time we'll go with 8. Address. This time around, my expectation is that the 2 events are going to fire to Gadget, an order webhook and a meta field webhook. And Gadget's just smart enough to know that those 2 things are actually related to the same record. And now the record is there. And if we scroll all the way to the end, the VAT number field is there too. And there's the VAT information that I just entered. So I've taught Gadget how to take metafield data and place it in the order table so that I have a nice clean record with everything I need in one row. Now, I haven't done anything useful yet. I haven't validated this VAT information. How do we do that? So there's a nice library on the internet called VAS or something like that. Or sorry, I got it wrong. There's an NPM package. I believe it's kind of maintained by the European Union themselves. It's free to use. The API is pretty easy to install. There's an NPM package as well. So this is the NPM module that I'm going to be using. It's called VSVAT. And what I'm going to teach Gadget to do is every time a webhook with an order comes in, take the VAT ID, take the country code, send it to this service, and this service will return valid or invalid as a result. And then I'm going to store that in Shopify. So that's the last part of this project. To do that, you go to Gadget, and what you're going to do is you're going to teach Gadget that the create action, which is currently firing every time Shopify fires the order create webhook, should not just copy data into a database table like I did moments ago. It should do something a bit more useful. It should run some code for me. And you don't have to use Gadget's web editor when you're coding. You can actually run this command in your terminal and use VS Code. But I'm not going to do that because it takes a little bit of time to set up. I'm going to actually write my code directly in the Gadget web editor. This file that you're looking at called onCreateSuccess, this is a serverless function that's going to run every time a Shopify order is created successfully. So when the order is created, when the webhook fires to Gadget, Gadget's going to copy the data to a table, and as soon as that's done, it's going to run this file. And what's special about the file before I write any code is line 5. So we are importing a large set of objects that know how to talk to your Gadget backend. So you can make API calls to any table in Gadget, whether it's a Shopify table or a custom table, and you can look at the record, which I'm going to use heavily because I want to look at the Shopify order record, take parts of the record and send it to a third-party API. You can do console logs. Connections is a special object that lets you talk to Shopify back and forth without having to build your own authentication. And so you just write business logic. And what your code ends up looking like, and again, I apologize, I'm going to copy paste it just so we can move a tiny bit faster, but I'll walk you all through it line by line. What your code ends up looking like is something as short as this. So line 1, I'm trying to require that NPM package that I was showing you moments ago, this NPM library here. I'm going to try to use it. And in order to use it, sorry, I'm going to close a couple of tabs. This is getting messy. In order to use it, I need to actually install this package. So to do that, there's a couple of ways in Gadget. If you hit Command P, this search console also acts as a terminal. So you can just do yarn add, it's called VSVAT, and Gadget will just go and yarn install that NPM package for you. So we'll give this a minute, it should work. The second way to add an NPM package is you can go to the package JSON file directly and type it in yourself. So you can do it manually using package JSON, or you can hit Command P, yarn add, and then the name of the package, and Gadget will go install it for you. Great. So this is successful. Everything worked. If I look at my package JSON now, there is a package called VSVAT with the latest version, I presume, installed. Now let's go back to my code, which was on create success for orders. I require that NPM package. I have a couple of constants that I'm going to use just to return back whether the VAT ID is valid or invalid to Shopify. So I'm just declaring a couple of constants in line 4 and 5. What's interesting is line 11 through 26. So line 12, I take the VAT number of the record, and there's an if statement because presumably someone could leave it empty. But if there is a VAT number, I use the record object, which is available to me through this import statement, line 11. And I tell Gadget, go to record.vat number. Gadget knows which record we're talking about because Gadget keeps state on which ID it's interacting with. And so it'll know, okay, there's an ordering context and there's a VAT number. I need to go find the VAT number. At the same time, there's a billing address country code that I need to send as well. So I'm going to send the VAT number and the country code, both of which are stored in my order record that's coming in through the webhook. Line 18, that's just a console log statement. Logger.info is just like a richer version of console log for server-side logs. So it lets you just do fancier, prettier log presentations that'll show up in the Gadget built-in logs. So all I'm doing here is just making sure that we get a response from the tax service that we're using. And then line 20 to 23, what I'm doing is I'm taking the valid, invalid response that I'm going to get back from the service I'm using. And I'm using the connections object Gadget gives me to do connections.shopify.current, which means whichever store this record belongs to, because you can use Gadget to build public apps as well, where you have many stores installing your application and you don't want to hard code the URL of the store in your code every time. So what we have is this kind of helper for you where you just say connections.shopify.current. Gadget knows .current means a specific shop with a specific shop ID. And then what we do is we run order update on the record that we're interacting with. The same ID is stored Gadget side. So I'm using the ID on the Gadget side to send information back to Shopify. There's a field in the Shopify order called tag. It's here. It's empty right now. What I'm going to try to do is return the response in this field. And that's what I'm doing down here. So I'm taking the response and I'm returning it into the tag, either VAT validated or VAT invalid, the two values you see in line 4 and 5. And then again, line 25, I just have another logger.info console log to make sure that the VAT actually got tagged to the order. So that's it. Client side, I submitted a Shopify extension through Shopify CLI, but I wired it up to a meta field, and then I use Gadget server side to fetch all the data, the webhook data, the meta field data, and execute this serverless function for me using the Gadget framework. Presumably, I am done. Presumably, this application should work, and I should test it right now. So let's go and test this, because Gadget's development environment is in the cloud. There is no deploy process. Your latest changes are running on your development URL. You can instantly test what you build, which is one of the really nice features of the platform. So to test it, I think I need to go back to this weird developer console that Shopify has and reopen the checkout. And we'll input my information once more. We'll put in a number that presumably is going to fail. Canada is not in Europe, and this number is made up. So the result should be VAT invalid. And we're going to punch in my address or a address and continue to payment, fill out the form. Hit pay now. Now, orders placed. If we go to my orders table, I can see the new order just came in. I can see the VAT number is there. And I can see the tag says VAT invalid. So my entire application is working. I took the order webhook, I took the meta field data, I sent it to Gadget's database. Gadget saved it first, and then Gadget executed the serverless function, which took the record information, ran it against this library, and returned the result back to the order. And by the way, if you want to see what's happening in development as you're building, the logs are fantastic for this purpose. So we have logs that you can use to see both what's happening in your development environment as well as production. Production's empty right now. I haven't actually deployed my app to production. Development is where all the action is happening, and you can see what happened. Shopify dispatched a webhook at 11:11. The webhook payload contained all the order data I cared about. Gadget created a record in the order table with that information. Gadget then started executing my function, this file here. This is my first console log statement that says, hey, I got a response from the service. And you can actually go look at the response, and there you go. Not an EU country. I sent in Canada, and it's trying to tell me to send in a European country. And I've mapped this to be that invalid. So this is the second console log statement. This is me sending the tag that invalid to Shopify. And what you see up here, by the way, if you're curious, because I updated the order in Shopify, Shopify fires another webhook at Gadget, this time for the order update topic. So this first one was, if you look at the topic of the first webhook, let's close this. You can see webhook topic. Oh, actually, they fired order updated the first time as well, which is kind of weird. Sometimes Shopify does that. They'll create an update at the same time, and the update comes before the create. When that happens, Gadget treats update as create, which is what you want. So I got this webhook first. I created that, sent it to Shopify, but then Shopify sends another webhook because I just updated the order, but I'm ignoring it because I don't have any logic on my update action. You can see my update action doesn't do anything but copy data back into Gadget. It's my create action that runs a serverless function to go and validate the data. So I'm going to pause here. I know there's been a couple of questions thrown in the Q&A. I want to answer those kind of slowly and calmly, and then I'll reshare my screen and we can go to project number 2. And I might have to change things up because as per usual, I'm running late. So let's go look at some of the Q&A questions. So we have to select the Node.js template from the Shopify CLI, or can we select the PHP template as well? If the extension you are building with Gadget is completely decoupled from the server side, you can use any template you like. I just had Node set up on my computer, so I went with Node, but you could have done the checkout extension creation and submission in PHP. But everything you saw me do server-side in Gadget has to be Node.js and React. Gadget is always Node.js on the back end and React on the front end, but you could have presumably submitted your checkout extension in PHP and that would have been fine. So Osama, to answer your question, the answer is yes, you could have used PHP in this particular example. If we want to create our own database tables and run more complex queries on them, are we able to do that? Yes, you can. This particular demo doesn't really leverage it so much, but let me just share my screen real quick. I am using Shopify tables only for this application because I don't really need any other data, but presumably some apps need proprietary first-party data as well. And if ever you need to blend in first-party data, you can create your own models. You just hit this plus button and you give the model a name. So we'll say, my blog posts. I'm going to store my blog posts here. You define the table in fields. You'll add a field that says maybe a blog post has a title and a body. And instantly Gadget gives you create, update, and delete API endpoints. So we will set up the controllers and the route handlers, and we'll actually build a full API for you. So if you go to your API reference, this is your project's API. I didn't need it earlier, but what you'll notice is the blog post table I just created in Gadget. In exchange for the little bit of information I gave Gadget, Gadget actually gave me a full GraphQL API, a full JavaScript client, and a full React client as well. And I can retrieve a blog post, retrieve many, create, update, delete, and all of these endpoints are live, by the way. You can actually use these in both your server side in Gadget or your client side, which could be in Gadget or in Shopify. So the answer is yes, you can create your own custom data tables. That's one of the big features of Gadget is you just give us the shape of the table and we'll build a full API for you. And what's neat is similar to the Shopify API that can be extended in code, your own custom actions APIs can also similarly be extended by running server-side Node.js. So if you wanted to teach Gadget that every time a blog post is created, it should send an SMS to your grandmother, you would write a file of code here that requires the Twilio NPM package and sends an SMS. So that's a very long answer to your question, which was anonymous. If we want to create our own database tables and run more complex queries on them, are we able to? Yes, you are. And then for queries on the tables, you can either use the API. There's also a scripting language called Jelly, which is kind of like SQL, and it allows you to fetch data really, really quickly, almost in a SQL-like manner as well. So all of the normal capabilities of building applications are completely available to you. They're just a lot faster because of the Gadget framework, hopefully. I'm going to pause and give everyone 30 seconds to ask me more questions about the specific example. And if there are no more questions, we'll try to build a second app, although it'll be tight. I don't see any raised hands. And yeah, I don't see any raised hands. So let's go and start a second project. I'm going to switch it up. I know in the invite, I said I would do a PDF generator, but there's no way that that's going to finish in the next 30 minutes. And we're running slow. So instead of that, I'm actually going to talk about a use case that is very common in Shopify, and agencies actually deal with it quite a lot. It's syncing large amounts of data from Shopify to a third-party system. So the third-party system might be an inventory management system where you're actually like keeping track of inventory there and feeding it to Shopify whenever Shopify needs it. It could be an order system where like anytime there's an order in Shopify, you actually want to move it to this other user interface that your staff is using to fulfill orders from your fulfillment warehouse. And sometimes it's just to reconcile data. So there's this common use case of how do I take 100,000 orders from Shopify and send it off to this other API? I'll focus on that instead because I think I can get that done in 30 minutes. And it's a very common use case in the Shopify ecosystem. So for app number 2, I'm going to close a bunch of tabs. We're going to start fresh. We are going to build Gadget as middleware to sync data between Shopify and a third-party service. So I'm going to connect Gadget to a product called Airtable. Airtable is just a fancy spreadsheet in the cloud. So this is Airtable. Sorry, this is this is Airtable. I have a table already set up called migration mockup. What I'm doing here is I've created a table and I've created a few fields that would maybe capture product information. So product title, product body, and a bunch of information that I know exists in the product payload. And what I want to do is I want to take a store. Apologies, this is really annoying. Don't know why everyone loves Zoom so much. I have a store that I would want to use that has about 5,000 Shopify products. I'm going to take Shopify 5,000 Shopify products and load them into this empty table that you see. So this should go from 0 records to 5,000 records really, really quickly. Now, I'm using this just for illustrative purposes. Again, you would probably want to send the data to an order system or an inventory system. How you build it is exactly the same. I just didn't have an order system that I have an account for that I can send it to. So I'm going to use Airtable and just show it to you here. I go to a Shopify partners account and I create a new app. That's kind of step one. I'm not going to use the CLI this time. I'm not going to run this command in my terminal. I don't need a checkout extension. So it's a bunch of steps that are pretty slow. Instead, I'll just kind of give the app a name right here. We'll do Shopify to Airtable product sync. Shopify is going to give me my API keys. Similar to my other app, I just go and create a new Gadget project. So we'll do Airtable sync. And I will go connect to Shopify. And I have my client ID given to me moments ago and my client secret. This time around, I'm going to take 5,000 products that already exist in a store, and I'm going to run them all and load them into Airtable. So what I need is product data. So I look for the product scope. I'm probably only going to read product data, so I'll just say read. I'll just take write as well for fun, but I don't need it. And then again, the product scope actually powers many tables of data. You don't want to be wasteful. You only want to pay for what you need. In my case, I only need the product table. So I'm just going to take the product table itself. I'm going to ignore all of its children, the images, the variants, and all the other fun stuff. I'm just going to ignore. I'm going to hit confirm. And again, what Gadget does is it creates a copy of the things I care about in my Gadget backend. And one of those things is the product table with all of its fields, types, and validations built in, and an API that allows me to react to events from Shopify and run my own serverless functions. So next step will be finishing the setup. Similar to my previous demo, I'm going to take the app URL and the allowed redirect URL back to Shopify. So I go to app setup, drop in the app URL, drop in the redirect URL, and hit save. And I'm going to immediately install this app on a store with a lot of products. I have one here that has about 5,000 products. I think I mentioned that earlier. Again, Gadget's kind of set up the OAuth for me, all of the security requirements, content security policy headers, tenancy, session token handling. The reason I can install this on a real store within the first 3 minutes of my experience is because Gadget takes care of so much for me. So I just say, yeah, these are the scopes that I'm granting this app developer. Let's go install the app. And now if we go back to the Gadget side, once the installation completes successfully, so there we go, the install is successful. We can go back to the Gadget side and we can see in my development environment, one shop has installed my app. This is the shop, and these are the webhook topics I'm registered for. And these webhook topics will fire these actions, similar to my previous example, except this time it's on the product table, not on the order table. So one of the neat things about Gadget is that it's not going to just run these actions when a webhook fires. We have a second trigger as well for Shopify called sync. Sync is basically when you need historical data. If you look at this store already has thousands of products in its product inventory. This table goes on forever. When I create my app, these products already exist. I'm not going to get webhooks for these products unless they get updated, but I'm not going to create webhooks. So if I'm trying to send 5,000 of these products to Airtable, I can't wait for webhooks to occur. I have to actually go fetch all the data. That's a really hard problem in Shopify because fetching large amounts of data rate limits you very, very hard. And so with Gadget, what we've done is we've created an API called Sync. It's documented in your API reference. There's the command called sync run. And what you can do is you can tell us which table, which model, which shop, and what date range you care for. And we will actually go fetch all the records from that shop for that table for that date range. So this is an API call that you can make either client side or server side in Gadget. And Gadget will handle all of the challenging parts of getting 5,000 records from Shopify, dealing with rate limits, making sure we fetch every single one, and making sure we don't lose any. So you just write one API call, we do everything else. Now, I'm not going to use the API call to sync the information in Gadget. There's also a way to do it in the UI. The way you would do it in the UI is if you're building a custom app for one merchant, you can always log in and just click this button. So instead of writing 10 lines of code to run the sync server side or client side on install, I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to hit this button. And what Gadget will do is it'll fetch every single product from Shopify's, from the store that I just synced, and it'll copy it to my Gadget database because that's what the create action called Shopify product does. It takes the data and it creates a record. So if we start looking at this table in Gadget, at least, it's starting to get noisy. There's page after page after page, and this is going to go on for a while because I have many thousands of records coming into my Gadget database. But nothing is in Airtable yet. Airtable is still empty. So what I actually need to do is teach Gadget some logic to take the order events as they come in and do something useful to them. So similar to that validation example, all I really need is a serverless function that takes the record data that just comes in and sends it off to Airtable. So that's what I'm going to set up next. Before I do that, let me just see if that sync has finished running. It's still running. You have a nice table where you can actually see your syncs as well and what status they're in. My sync is still running, which is unfortunate. I want it to be done. Let me just delete everything and see if I can empty my table. Yeah, you can see, like, even though I'm deleting, there's more records coming in faster than I can delete them. And so, yeah, we're going to have to give this a little minute or two to finish running before we can continue. But while it's doing that, I'll talk about what code I'm going to write and what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to create a serverless function that hooks off of the create action in Gadget, takes the data and sends it to an Airtable table. Add a code snippet. Again, you don't have to use our web editor. You can run this command and use VS Code to write your files of code. I'm going to do it more quickly using the web editor. And again, I'm going to copy paste some code that I had prepared beforehand. So go to my Airtable mock app. I have a little bit of code that I can run on create. I'm just going to paste it in here and I'm going to walk you all through it. So what am I doing? Const Airtable require Airtable. So Airtable has a npm package, which I need to install. So again, command P, the command is yarn add Airtable. Gadget will go and install the Airtable package for me. Let's give this a minute to run. While it's running, let's go read the rest of the code file. So I'm going to use the Airtable npm package. Then I have a bunch of authentication information that I need to send through. So I need this thing called an Airtable access token, an Airtable base ID, and an Airtable table ID, which I can add to Gadget and environment variables. I'll do that in a second. So we go down here to settings, environment variables, and I think it'll be easier for me to copy paste them from here. You can take these, by the way. There's no money on my account. You can use my Airtable if you like. So we'll grab the access token for development. I'm not going to put production credentials in yet because I'm not going to deploy to production. The base ID and the table ID are also required. These are basically just credentials Airtable gives you. For lack of a better explanation, they're just 3 bits of info that Airtable gives you every time you create a new table in their product. And it allows you to make API calls to that table. So I've got my credentials. Let me just make sure my package JSON succeeded and Airtable was installed. So that went well. Let's go back to the code file. So line 6 through 11, you can kind of ignore. This is basically me just authenticating against this Airtable table that I'm going to write against. And you can see some records are starting to show up. The reason this is happening is because Gadget's development environment is in the cloud and there is no deploy. So as soon as I added this file of code and I added my environment variables, this file became functional and Gadget started running it on the sink that is still running. So the sink is still running, but now Gadget is not just copying data. It's also, Gadget is not just copying the product data into a product table. It's also running this file that's sending it down here. So you can see now all the records are starting to show up one by one. So what I should have done is I probably should have actually finished writing all my code and then ran the sync. And I would have gotten the entire 5,000 record set. You can see this is coming in one by one. And Airtable's API is a little slow, so you can only send, I think, 5 requests a second. But this will eventually populate the entire data set. And what I've essentially done is with 15 lines of code, I've created a sync of 5,000 products from Shopify to Airtable. I could have done Shopify to NetSuite. I could have done Shopify to an inventory system. It would have worked pretty much exactly the same way. I want to call out one big caveat, which I'm not going to show you folks how to set up, but I want to explain. Anytime, I think maybe explaining it visually is a good idea. Anytime you're using Gadget as middleware, which is essentially what I'm doing in this example, you have 2 services on 2 sides. So in this case, I got Shopify on one side. I have Airtable on the other side. Gadget reads records from Shopify as quickly as possible. Meaning whatever Shopify's rate limits allow, we usually max them out. So there is no faster way to fetch 5,000 records, I'm quite sure, than to use Gadget. But that creates a problem. That sounds really good in theory. The problem is Shopify can handle that, Gadget can handle that, but sometimes the endpoint you're trying to send the data to has its own rate limits, and those rate limits might be different than Shopify. So Shopify might say that you can read 10 records a second, and then Airtable might say you can write 5 records a second. What'll inadvertently happen when you're dealing with 2 systems that have different rate limits is Gadget's going to go so fast that Airtable will eventually start returning 429s. It'll start saying like, hey, timeout, like calm down. You're sending me 10 a second. You're only allowed 5. And the reason Gadget's trying to send 10 a second is because this action is being run synchronously. Every time a record is being synced or a webhook comes in, we immediately try to send it off. And with webhooks, that's not a problem. They come in one by one. If there's a giant sale, maybe they come in 10 at a time, but not in massive numbers. With syncing, though, Gadget's going to go fetch 5,000 records and start pushing them through as quickly as possible. Airtable will eventually 429. It didn't happen in this example just because the sync had already started before, and you can see there were only 94 records left from the 5,000. So Airtable did not 429, but it would have 429'd if I had sent the entire 5,000 records. So the way to do this properly, if you're going to sync 5,000, 50,000, 500,000, we've seen people do hundreds of thousands of records with Gadget as well, is to introduce a queue. So you don't go Shopify to Gadget, Gadget to Airtable right away. What you instead do is you go Shopify, Gadget to some queuing service. The one that we recommend is Google Cloud Tasks because it's free and it's very easy to set up. Airtable. I'm not going to do this because we've run out of time and I want to answer a few more questions, but I want to call out that there is a incredibly useful tutorial in our blog, as well as in our docs and tutorials called Gadget as Middleware. This tutorial actually shows you how to properly set up a Google Cloud Task account and use Google Cloud Tasks to slow Gadget down because it's going to be too fast. So basically what you do is Gadget sends the data to a Google Cloud queue. And these Google Cloud Task queues it's kind of a no-code tool. I think there's a couple of screenshots I can show you. Like you just set up a queue, you give it a name, and this is a screenshot from Google. You tell it how many requests it should try to send off per second. So in my case, I probably would have said 5 per second because I know Airtable can't handle more than 5 per second. And then what Google will do is it'll slow everything down, send it off to Airtable slowly, and also some retry logic as well. So you can actually like configure, if it fails, retry 5 times. If you are trying to set up a robust data pipeline between system A, Shopify, and system B, ERP system, Airtable, inventory, whatever, through Gadget, make sure to set up a queue in between. Gadget goes really fast and it will overwhelm the API that you're trying to send data to. So I want to stop there because I think the second app is done. I didn't do the full sync, unfortunately, because I had already started syncing before I wrote my code. Here, we can empty the table. We can just to prove that I'm not making stuff up. We can empty the table in Gadget as well. There is no more data in Gadget. There's no data in the Airtable table, and we can run the sync again. Is this still running? Oh, Gadget still thinks this sync is running, unfortunately. Yeah, sometimes things will take a little bit of time to terminate because we'll kind of go through the entire record set and see if it's still ongoing. So that's what's preventing me from clicking this button, which is unfortunate. Once that sync is actually done running, you can come back and click it again and queue up another sync and run the whole thing. And you would have seen 5,000 records appear in Airtable, and you probably would have seen a lot of timeouts. And that's what would have alerted me to think a little bit and say, hey, this solution doesn't scale. I need a queue between Gadget and Airtable, and setting up a queue using Google Cloud Tasks takes about 10 minutes. So the whole project would have added 10 more minutes to my scope, but it would have been a lot more robust and future-proof. I'm going to stop there, stop sharing my screen. I am curious if anyone has questions. Now is a great time. There are none in the, yeah, I've answered these ones. Okay, there's a question from Bogdan. Can you please briefly explain if and how you would use Shopify functions with Gadget? Okay, great. I'll explain it. I can't show it to you, but it's very, very similar to checkout extensions. So first of all, if you're building a theme app extension, a checkout extension, or a Shopify function, you always need Shopify CLI. You have to submit the code for extensions and functions through Shopify CLI. There's no way around it. Gadget cannot submit a function for you. Gadget cannot submit an extension for you. So similar to what I did in my first example with a checkout UI extension, I opened up CLI and I kind of ran a few of Shopify's commands to create the extension boilerplate. There's a different set of commands that you use for functions. You boot up your terminal, you run those commands, you get all the boilerplate for functions, and then you write your function in one of the languages that is supported. I think it's Rust and JavaScript now, and you submit that to Shopify. So the function submission portion has nothing to do with Gadget. Where Gadget comes in is everything server side. So the OAuth, the scopes that you need maybe to power your function, anything you're doing after checkout that's using that data, like your function maybe stores some data in a meta field, and then you're going to try to pick that up once the checkout is done and validate it. You know, maybe you're trying to do something with the data that's coming from a function. That's where Gadget comes in. So again, Gadget's really all the OAuth setup, the webhook handling setup, the security, tenancy, the entire server side, and Shopify CLI will be used for submitting the function in the same way as we submitted a checkout extension using Shopify CLI, the client side of it. Hopefully that answered your question, Bogdan. If not, just throw in a follow-up and I will answer again. It looks like I did answer your question. I think for the next one, I'm having fun doing these, if I'm being honest. And there's always a good 10 to 20 people that show up, so it's great. I think next time around, I'm gonna run Gadget as middleware again. And this time I'll do it with a Google Cloud task in the middle, because I get the impression that agencies and freelancers in the Shopify ecosystem find these projects difficult because syncing hundreds of thousands of records from Shopify is challenging. That's the point of Gadget. It does it really well. And so I want to show you guys how to set up maybe Shopify to NetSuite, a real ERP system that Shopify merchants use, and how to send 100,000 orders to NetSuite. I'll try to do that next time properly using a Google Cloud queue in the middle. And again, it'll take me 45 minutes to do it. And you can imagine, as a freelancer or an agency owner, you get paid a lot of money for these projects. And if you can do them in an hour, you just made a lot of money in an hour. So hopefully this session was helpful to you all. I don't see any other questions that have been asked. I'm going to call it here. And yeah, I'll do another one in 2 weeks. I'll switch up the apps. We're going to send a feedback form to everyone who attended. Please give me feedback on how I can make this better, if this was even useful or not. And also give me some suggestions for the apps you would like to see me build next time. I'm going to just try to do 1 or 2 apps every 2 weeks. And I would like to do use cases that you folks actually build regularly in your day-to-day, as opposed to making them up. I hope you all found this really useful. I will be in the Discord all day today. You can find me, Gadget Mo, DM me if you want a follow-up question or something that you weren't comfortable asking publicly. Just shoot me a DM on Discord in the next few hours. I'll be around and I can jump on another call and clarify things. Best of luck, everyone. Hope to see what you all build in Gadget, and have a great weekend. Take care.